Okay, shall we make a start?
Yeah, that sounds fine.
Yuma, everyone. I'm greeting you from Ngunnawal country in Canberra, ACT. My name's Viv Pearce. I'm from the ACT chapter of A Squared, E Squared. And I just want to acknowledge we're on Ngunnawal country. Canberra has for thousands of years been a meeting place for many of our First Nation people. And I wanted to acknowledge how great it is to be able to know about our plants and how we should care for country, that knowledge that elders have passed on to us, past and present. I just want to also say Yuma to any other Indigenous people who are present today. And I'm really happy to open this wonderful get-together and gathering of educators to learn about what certainly here in the ACT we have known for a long time is a very important part that is not only STEM type things, but the art is a very important mechanism by which we can convey and connect with the natural environment around. And who better than Julia, who was our ACT educator in 2019. Her work for a long time with the wildlife botanic artists here in Canberra since the late 90s. And then her founding of NatureArt Lab, where she has developed and mentored many of our wildlife artists here and our community in general here in the ACT. So I've talked enough, Julia. I'm waiting to see one of your wonderful professional developments on nature journaling. And isn't it great that we're doing this at the end of World Nature Journaling Week? I've been seeing all these great things about nature journaling. So over to Julia now. Oh, I just wanted to acknowledge Jen, our president of A Squared, E Squared, that's here over in Western Australia. And it's great to see you all here. And I'm sure we'll be connecting to country because I know that Julia really does connect to country. So over to you, Julia.
Okay, thank you very much, Viv, and welcome everybody for joining this this wonderful opportunity to talk about nature journaling. As Viv said, this is the end of International Nature Journaling Week. Nature journaling has become a global phenomenon. There are people in every country around the world who are working on observations of nature and learning how to see, learning how to understand, learning more about the natural history of our local environment. And I think today, as Viv said, I've been teaching now nature journaling for over 4 years and working with environmental education through art for around 30 years. So I'm very excited to be able to share this with you. I'm just going to put my presentation on now and share a screen with you. So let's just see how that goes. So sorry, I'll just make sure. Here we go. Hopefully, just let me know if everyone can see. Okay, so how and why of nature journaling? This is a little drawing on the front screen here now of a beautiful Westringia from the southeast coast of Australia. And This was done while I was sitting on a coastal headland, looking at some of the beautiful fauna of this area, using a little ink pen, using some watercolors and a little bit of gouache in a notebook, a visual art diary. And that's something that I really want to emphasize during our presentation, that nature journaling is something that everyone can do, and you don't need a huge amount of equipment or materials to be able to do this. And as I often say, and I think many people would be able to relate to this, there's nothing like taking a walk in nature to calm the mind and remind us that the world is a wonderful place. It might also be walking on a beach, it might be walking in your favourite nature reserve, and there are very important reasons why this does calm the mind, and that's part of what I'm going to talk about today. Internationally, there's a growing body of knowledge and research around eco-psychology and the benefits of exposure to the natural world. Humans are wired to connect with nature, and the more that we do, we see improvements in health and healing and well-being. There's a very famous book written by Richard Louv called The Last Child in the Woods that many people may be familiar with, and it was largely credited with starting a movement on nature research. There are obvious impacts on people from not having connections with nature, known as a nature deficit disorder. And there's also a lot of research demonstrating that it is an important and essential part of our physical health, as well as our cognitive functioning and mental health and well-being. Many epidemiological studies and research are also showing that connections with nature actually reduce high blood pressure and heart disease and other chronic illnesses. Being in nature also reduces stress and anxiety for many people, and it improves your mental health and well-being, as I've mentioned. And there's also a lot of research now showing that we need at least 2 hours every day in nature to achieve these benefits. Many schools in countries around the world are also changing their practices to incorporate nature time. Some of the changes that we're seeing in public policy are including adding parks and green spaces, increasing the number of forest schools, and for example in Scandinavia and the United States. There are many healthcare providers now embracing nature immersion, including here in the ACT, with GPs endorsing nature walks for those with chronic illnesses and anxiety. In Japan, many people are using forest bathing and walking in the woods as a phenomenon to treat infections and cancer with patients. And there are also legislative changes for the legal rights of nature being introduced in many countries. For example, in Ecuador, Bolivia, and in Costa Rica and New Zealand, as well as ensuring that people, humans, have a right to be part of nature. So with all of this research and with all of the understanding that we now have about the importance of nature, there's around the increasing recognition of the cognitive and emotional benefits of nature. There's a need for this to be factored into economic ecosystem service models to inform livability and sustainability in our cities. So I'm just going to say a few words about NatureArt Lab. This is an organisation that I set up in 2017 specifically to promote engagement with nature through art and science. And the idea behind NatureArt Lab is to give people the space and the skills to engage with nature and the environment in ways that are meaningful and beneficial to them and to our environment. And I'm really keen to promote an environment where respect for people and their engagement with nature is paramount. Now, many through the last 4 years, all of the different programs that we've been teaching, we've now engaged thousands of students and people from all over the world, as well as all over Australia in our programs. And so through our programs, we're offering classes for adults and children, as well as guided nature tours to national and international locations. And all of our nature tours are accompanied by professional artists, nature photography mentors, and scientists. And so a lot of our recent programs have included places like many of the national parks around Australia, Montague Island in New South Wales, Murray National Park. We recently took a group of 14 people up to Atherton Tablelands and the Cape York, northern areas of Cape York in North Queensland, the Abrolhos Islands in Western Australia. But overseas, we've also taken groups on a regular basis to Sabah, Malaysian Borneo, Costa Rica, and next year, if everything goes well, we're hoping to take a group across to the Galapagos Islands, Ecuador and Peru. Now, you might ask why these places and what do these tours have in common that makes them so unique? And it's all about biodiversity. As a global community, we are facing enormous environmental crises, and the threat of climate change is significant. But even more important than that is the impact on biodiversity. And I think by giving people an opportunity to engage in these important biodiverse locations and actually experiencing the life cycles of different plants and animals and ecosystems in each of these places, what we are seeing is that people have a much, much greater understanding of the world and of the impacts of global climate change on biodiversity and on the environment. So these are classes, the nature tours, and all of the other things that we're doing are life-changing events for many people. So just a question. What do Albert Einstein, Leonardo da Vinci, and Beatrix Potter have in common? And the answer is nature journaling. Each of these famous people have kept a journal or a diary to record their experiences, their thoughts or feelings. And these examples on this page are some of Leonardo da Vinci's beautiful drawings and sketches of plants that he was observing as an interested nature observer. But many of you will also be familiar with the human anatomical diagrams that Leonardo da Vinci did. And all of those drawings and the observations that he was making led to scientific discoveries and led to much greater understanding and appreciation of the world and how things work, whether it was plants or animals or humans in the scientific discoveries that he made. But the amazing thing is that from scientific geniuses like Leonardo da Vinci to thoughtful observers and every single person, we can all keep a nature journal, and it can be a hugely satisfying experience. These are a couple of quotes from Leonardo da Vinci as well, and they're very important comments on why observation and nature journaling is so important. And so this first quote from Leonardo da Vinci was, "Imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited, whereas imagination embraces the entire world, stimulating progress, giving birth to evolution. It is, strictly speaking, a real factor in scientific research." And so the key words here are about imagination and scientific research and learning to explore our world through observation and drawing and journaling. And there's another quote here. "He who can no longer pause to wonder and stand wrapped in awe is as good as dead. His eyes are closed, Now that's a very, very powerful statement, once again, about learning to see the natural environment and the sense of awe and inspiration that nature, as it has unfolded and evolved in our world, is something that we really need to learn to see and not take for granted as in our busy lives. This is a beautiful series of illustrations by Beatrix Potter. She's a very well-known British writer and illustrator for children's books, but she was also a person who was interested in a range of scientific disciplines, including mycology, the study of fungi. She also explored a lot of other subjects, including insects and plants. And you can see from these beautiful drawings that she's been doing, she's looking at these beetles and understanding how their legs are structured, what the mouth parts look like, and what the legs, how the beetles' body parts come together. So she's done some beautiful drawings of the top side of the beetle, the underside of the beetle, and some close-up drawings showing the parts of the beetle's legs. The little fungi illustration on the other side is of a very tiny fungi that's only a couple of millimeters high. But what she's done is she's actually having a closer look at it, the structures, the colors, the fruiting bodies on top of these little fungi. And her work, again, is all about curiosity, imagination, and an understanding of the importance of learning about the natural world for conservation. So what are some of the benefits of nature journaling? One of the most important things is becoming more present through nature art and connecting more deeply with our natural surroundings. It's also about practicing mindfulness. And in our contemporary lifestyles, we often don't give ourselves the time to slow down and to look at things more closely and to really understand what's happening around us in nature. So once you start doing some nature journaling and sitting and looking at something a little bit more closely, you'll notice that a lot of the busy things that are around us suddenly disappear, and your focus and your attention is on a single thing, and it can really be a hugely calming and a really wonderful experience. So slowing down and paying attention and actually experiencing the natural world through all of our senses is a really special way to understand nature. And that means listening to the sounds of the birds around us, noticing the sounds of the wind or the wind rustling leaves in a tree, or tasting things or smelling things that might be flowering or whatever it might be. Really experiencing the natural world and starting to pay attention using all of our senses. But also nature journaling helps to develop creativity and critical thinking skills, and actually helps us to start to ask questions about what we're seeing and think differently about why things might be working the way they are. In a world that's all about symbiosis and connections, natural connections between each and every living thing, we can start to learn a little bit more about why that particular fungus might be growing at the base of a eucalypt tree, and so many more questions that we might have about why particular birds are visiting particular flowers or trees. So the critical thinking skills and the questions that come with curiosity and nature journaling are really important ways of being that we often forget to do or don't give ourselves time to do. And this is also, nature journaling is also about supporting a growth mindset. So what it's saying is we're acknowledging that we don't know all about our natural world. We don't know all about the things that we might be seeing or looking at. And a growth mindset is about learning more and learning to see more, learning to understand, learning to ask questions, and not being afraid to ask questions about what we're seeing and thinking about things. So nature journaling, and through many of the courses and the programs that we're running, we're learning the basics of how to observe and draw as you engage with nature. And combining nature and art are both to create unique, beautiful and captivating images is partly what nature journaling is all about. But it's not about being necessarily an artist. It's about being an observer and being able to learn to draw and to see things that you may not have noticed before. So as in nature journaling, what we're basically doing is being a naturalist. We're being curious, we're paying attention to things, we're noticing things. We're building that sense of wonder and awe that Leonardo da Vinci was talking about in that quote. We're spending time outdoors, which in itself is really good for us because we're going to be breathing fresh air, we're going to be experiencing nature itself and using all of your senses and exploring the world around you. This little illustration was in one of my nature journals, and it was looking at a little caterpillar that I found in the garden in our backyard. It was on a eucalypt leaf, and I because I've done a lot of work with insects, I thought that this little caterpillar was about to pupate and create a cocoon. So some caterpillars like to make their cocoons in soil. So I found a little container of soil and it immediately pupated. And you can see there on the screen, this is the pupa that it formed once it had its suitable place to go to that next stage of its development. And then I waited and watched. And on the 22nd of June, this beautiful little moth emerged, and it was the pink-bellied moth. And I had no idea what this caterpillar was until I followed this cycle and made these nature journaling notes, and this is what emerged. And so, you know, it was just a wonderful experience to be able to use nature journaling to document that process and learn something more about this particular caterpillar. So with nature journaling, you only need a very simple drawing kit and maybe a couple of pencils, a micron pen or two, an eatable eraser, which is just a soft eraser that you can use to lift graphite from your drawing page. You might also like to have just a normal vinyl eraser because for rubbing out lines that you don't want there. And a visual diary or a journal. And it's really good to think about the paper quality that you're using for nature journaling. If you're wanting to add on things like coloured pencils or watercolours, you might also like to have a little water brush, which is a small plastic refillable brush that you can take anywhere with you. It has water in it, so you don't need to have a separate water container for painting. And you might also like to have a white gel pen or a small pencil to do some artwork. And basically all of those things can fit into a small pencil case that you can take with you anywhere, including your visual diary. And depending on what size you want to have, you might have a small A5 size diary, or you might like an A4 that has spiral binding so you can have it flat on your knee as you're sitting and watching or doing some journaling in nature. And these things don't cost a lot, so it's very accessible. It's something that everyone can do and get an enormous amount of enjoyment from. So just a little bit about, I'm just going to go to the next slide. If everyone's familiar with different kinds of pencils, this slide just shows you the sort of marks that you can get with doing nature journaling using different types of pencils. So most people will use the HB, and that's kind of the middle of the range pencil. So it provides a nice medium line, medium tone, so it's not too dark and it's not too light. But so most people will have an HB pencil at home. But if you want to learn to draw with some tonal variations in your drawings, then you might like to try using say a 2B or a 4B pencil. You can see it's darker and it's softer for drawing. or you might like to have a 2H or a 4H pencil, and which creates finer lines and softer marks. So that's just a little bit about different kinds of pencils that you can use with nature journaling. So with all drawing, there are a few principles that will just help you to make a better drawing. And one of those things is understanding values. And one of the things that we're often teaching and talking about is being able to create pencil lines that show from lighter colours through to darker colours, and using different types of mark making. So you can do stippling with lots of dots to create a dark area, or with just a few dots to create a lighter look with your drawing. You can use cross-hatching or hatching and squibbling marks that make different types of values on your paper. The other drawing element is line and linear drawing. So you can use different mark-making techniques to create your drawings, and be creative with the sorts of line marking that you're using to portray a subject. The other element of drawing is light and shade. So always remembering where your light source is coming from, so that you've got three-dimensional subjects, and showing the shadows on the side of a stem of a flower stem, for example. And perspective is the other area that we need to think about when we're drawing. So looking at proportions, looking at angles and different viewpoints to look at a subject. So when we're nature journaling, one of the most important things is looking at something before you draw. And with nature journaling, if you have a leaf in front of you, sit and have a look at the leaf, turn it over, look at the underside of it, look at the top side of it, look at how the veins are connecting on that leaf. And you might also have a look at for example, if you have some gum nuts, you might look and see, what do the gum nuts look like? Where are they connecting? How many of them are there on your little stem? And what does the seed opening look like on the gum nut? And what sort of arrangements are there on this gum nut that you're looking at? And here in Australia, we have so many beautiful native plants and animals. There's so many different subjects we can look at to be inspired with for nature journaling. Now, once you've had a really good look at your subject, you can then start to block in the basics really lightly and loosely, check the proportions of your drawings, and then draw the subject with more definite lines. We can add value, which means dark and light colours to your drawing, and add colours. And we can do all sorts of wonderful things with colours, including colour mapping, to show what different colours are making up the subject that you're looking at. After all, a leaf is not just green, it has reds and blues and browns and all sorts of other colours in it. And it's starting to notice the different colours that you can see in your subject. When you're nature journaling, you can start to record some of those things. Also adding, if you're doing a landscape drawing and drawing a natural setting like a field of trees or something like that, you're going to add a bit more detail into the foreground and the focal areas of your drawing. One of the common things that people say when they're starting to draw is just knowing when to stop and not overworking your drawings. So now I'm going to give a couple of examples, and I also want to talk a bit about nature journaling elements. Nature journaling is not just about drawing. It's also about creative use of words and poetry and word patterns and different shapes of words and lettering. And all around the world, a lot of people are experimenting with all sorts of wonderful ways to use words in nature journaling. This lovely example here was from a recent group that we took to Murrumarang National Park, and it includes some beautiful drawings of found objects on the seashore. And the artist has written her thoughts about the objects that she found in and around her beautiful drawings here, just to create a very artistic and creative piece of work. And she's added some colour, and it's just a beautiful little piece about some found objects that she found on the beach at Murray National Park. Here's another example, and this is a drawing of a beautiful giant centipede that I found recently. And in this drawing, you can see that there's a use of a scale. So we're looking at measurements and the size of our subject, looking at perhaps some of the leaf litter that these centipedes love to live in, but also having a closer look at the segments and the way that the segments move and turn as this beautiful arthropod moves through the leaf litter, and the way that the structures look from the side of the centipede. So here's a little inset drawing showing a side view of this centipede. And while I was watching this centipede, I also found out a little bit more about what it liked to eat. So it was eating bush cockroaches and spiders, but it didn't like eating beetles or snails. So I was having a wonderful time learning more about this centipede through this nature journaling page. So for anyone who's new to nature journaling, there are basically 6 steps. And as we talked about earlier on, the first and most important thing is to observe and understand your subject. This is a beautiful photo of some little lichens that we found recently in a tropical rainforest up in North Queensland. So using your senses, sight, sound, smell, and touch, noticing surprising features and shapes, the angles and the lines of the structures, and looking at the textures of these little things. These little fungi were so tiny, they were almost microscopic, but when you had a closer look at them, they had the most beautiful shapes and the most beautiful textures on them. And the way that they emerged from the rotting timber was just fascinating. So another thing that you can do with your nature journaling is comparing and contrasting different things. Describing the colours with colour mapping, writing about your observations, being curious and inquisitive, and talking out loud about your observations. That's something that really helps with understanding what you're looking at and connecting with. So the next, or the base, going through these basic steps with a couple of examples. Here are some lovely examples of light, loose sketches and working quickly to draw what you see. And not what you expect to see, but actually looking at what you see in front of you. And noting any questions that you might have as you're drawing, and write those questions on your page. And then you can use a darker pencil or pen and start to draw in some more detail. And often it's really great to talk out loud to resolve the shapes that you're looking at. And here again, this example, you can see use of values, so different little lines to create a darker tone in the shadows of this shell, lighter tones to represent where the highlights might be on the shell. And you can see the texture and the shapes of this shell, just using very simple line marking and use of shadows and perspective in this drawing. This is another example from one of my journals, looking at the details of some eucalypt leaves. And one of the fascinating things that I've found with looking at eucalypt leaves is that the juvenile leaves are often much, much larger than the adult leaves. And this is an example of one tree here in the ACT I was looking at, where the lower leaves on the tree were these great big rounded leaves with lots and lots of insect chewing around the edges. But the adult leaves were quite different, with narrow shapes, again with lots of insect chewing on the sides of the leaves. But this drawing I did with coloured pencil, and so using a combination of all of these colours that I could see in the leaves gave me the opportunity to blend those colours into my drawing. I was also looking at different stages of the gum nuts and the fruits. So looking at the buds, the closed buds, and looking at what the flowers look like. And so you can use, for example, with developing your nature journal pages, you can start to add in some measures of the leaves. So these leaves were about 25 centimetres long. And using a ruler to measure what you're looking at, add in words, add in bullet points with ideas of what you're seeing and looking at, and add in any other questions or observations that you might have about the subject you're looking at. And this is the sort of thing that everyone can do. And again, if you've just got a set of coloured pencils and a pen and a normal graphite pencil, you can create these lovely drawings. And they create a point of a memory of your experiences in nature. So every page tells a story about something that you learned and something new that you saw. Now, this is the next step, I guess, with nature journaling and trying to look at things from a different perspective. This is a drawing in one of my nature journals of a bladder cicada. Bladder cicadas normally don't occur as far south as Canberra, but there's a population of bladder cicadas that appeared in Canberra, and it was very exciting to see them. And they started calling very loudly at around 6 o'clock at night, and with a really low continuous pulse, short intervals of calls. So I decided to have a look at these cicadas a little bit more closely and draw the side view of the cicada, draw the top view, and then draw from the underside of the cicada. And again, it was a wonderful way to learn to know a little bit more about this beautiful insect. So the last element of nature journaling is feedback and meta thinking about the overall image and your experience with what you were looking at, and recording your thoughts about what you learned, what you noticed. This is a little drawing of the Mareeba rock wallabies, which are a threatened population of wallabies up in North Queensland. So it was just an opportunity to sit down and have a look at these little wallabies, do some drawings of them amongst the granite rocks that were there. And you know, I was looking at some of the questions around this population that seemed to be being had supplementary feeding, and I was curious about what their natural diet was and what the impacts of human feeding were on this population for their health and well-being. But again, just a lovely opportunity to sit and watch animals in the wild and draw them with just ink sketching and a little bit of watercolour. This is another example of nature journaling, again in the field, sitting in the in Canberra and looking at some of the gorgeous earth star fungi that were emerging. We've had quite a bit of rain lately, and so these amazing earth star fungi were emerging, and so it was a really lovely opportunity to sit and have a look at these earth star just using a pencil and a visual art diary. Again, you can see different tonal variations there, so moving from dark to light, using simple outlines and drawing some of the acacia leaves that were falling on the ground in the leaf litter where these earth star fungi were growing. So there are lots of other project ideas that you might like to think about for doing nature journaling. You might like to think about seasonal observations that you're looking at in your area. In your own backyard, you know, how your garden changes between the different seasons. So as it gets cooler in winter, you might notice some differences with the way that plants work. In spring, you might start to see flowers emerging, and you might start to see different insects visiting. In summer, you're going to see a different set of things, possibly seeding plants and different leaves emerging. In autumn, you might see again a change of the plants and the animals and the wildlife that's visiting your garden. So seasonal observations are a really great idea for nature journaling. But you might also like to look at all sorts of different seeds or different kinds of leaves, or looking at different flowers from all sorts of plants in your garden or in your nature reserve or in your schoolyard. Look at different fungi that are growing. So looking down on the ground and having a closer look. Almost every single garden, every single space of soil has some kind of fungi growing, and it just is a matter of stopping and looking a little bit more closely. And every tree has different types of bark and different things growing on it and living on it. So again, it's about exploring and questioning and being curious about what we're seeing. And you might like to do a project on a beachfront and seeing what washes ashore each day and looking at the different shells, sea urchins and the rock pools and the seaweed and other things that are washing up on shore. You might also like to try some new topics, and this is a little butterfly that I was journaling up in Queensland. So if you wanted to try looking at things that you don't normally notice, you might select an alphabet letter, for example, and look at things that start with the letter B. So butterflies, birds or beetles or bugs and buds, or even blue items, and select a different letter for your next outing. And this is something that teachers might like to do with school classes and homeschooling nature journaling activities. What it does is it helps to for you to think about things you may not normally have looked at, and opens up your eyes to lots of different opportunities. Here's another project idea, and this is looking at things from the distance and looking at things up close. This nature journal page, I was looking at some of the different types of plants that were living together in a coastal community. So there were casuarinas, there were banksias, there were also acacias that were low growing with sort of oval shaped leaves. There were lots of lamandra grasses and other plants all growing together in a coastal community. So then I thought it would be really interesting just to have a closer look at the leaves of each of these plants as well. So with the banksia, the top of the leaves was this dark green colour with a lighter green centre margin. But underneath the leaves was a beautiful grey colour and with a brown margin. And it was really interesting, again, looking at the differences on the top and the bottom of those leaves. The casuarinas have these tiny segmented sections, which are not actually true leaves, but it was really interesting, again, to have a look at the differences between these leaves. So looking at things up close and looking at things from the distance can help you to start to see and notice the different shapes of different plants, as well as the leaf form and the structure of each plant that you're looking at. And here's another drawing from looking at structural differences of lianas that are climbing through a forest and casuarina forest, noticing the textured bark, noticing the mosses and lichens that were growing on the trunk, looking at the seed pods of some of the plants that were growing in this space. And so you can also be looking at bird behaviour, for example, and illustrating what birds are doing in the space, looking at the numbers of individuals that are growing in a certain area, or looking at some of the environmental factors that might be impacting on an ecosystem or a park that you're familiar with. You can also start doing some number journaling, looking at patterns of distribution with classes, and even having a square metre area and looking at how many different plant species you can find in a square metre, and looking at patterns of distribution based on how seeds are dispersed or what insects might be living in those areas. So many different things you can do. And you can also look at some exceptions. So what are the introduced plants, or what are the differences that you might be noticing in a plant or a natural community. This is another couple of nature journal pages from my nature journals again, which I was looking at a couple of the different species of the storksbill or herons bill plants that grow in our fields. And in Australia, there are a number of introduced species that have been introduced from the Mediterranean, which I had no idea about, but I started collecting a couple of different forbs that were growing in our nature reserve nearby. This one, these are both the same types of plants, but this one is the introduced one on the left. It's called the long heron's bill. And if you notice from this drawing that I did with ink and with coloured pencil, you can notice the length of the segments for each of the segments here, the length of the seed pods that this plant produced, the colour of the flowers, and I put the measurements on my drawing here, as well as the location and the date of when I saw these. This one, it was also growing in the same space, but it's a native Australian Erodium, Crinatum, and you can see that it has a different length of each of the segments here. They're much shorter than the introduced species. The leaves are smaller and the flowers are bright purple with 5 little petals. So it was really interesting doing a compare and contrast of these two species in the Oakey Hill Nature Reserve near our house. And this is another page looking at some of the seashore subjects that I found on a beach at Murray National Park. Here again, I was looking at the patterns in a sea urchin structure. With this one, I found that there were 5 different segments and there was absolute symmetry with this. And so trying to understand the symmetry and the mathematics in the cellular design of a sea urchin was quite fascinating. And this beautiful sea worm that had been collecting all sorts of different shells, little tiny abalone shells and other shells to make up its outside protective cover, was also fascinating. So you come across all sorts of amazing things, and you can be really creative about the way that you portray the subjects on your page and learn so many new discoveries about things you may not have ever seen before or noticed. This is another page from Tidbinbilla Nature Reserve in the ACT, and looking at the sawfly larvae that were eating a eucalypt leaf here, as well as one of the beautiful orchids that was flowering, and the ACT national floral emblem, Wallenbergia, which has the most beautiful little five-petal flowers, and having a closer look at these with coloured pencil and ink. So again, some more project ideas for nature journaling: observing changes over time, recording a specific event, making a map or constructing a cross-section of a habitat in a particular ecosystem or park. You can include details on your nature journaling of where and when you found the things, look at the dates, the locations, the time and the weather that you're seeing things. You might have lots of other ideas as well. So one of the things that I really like to talk about in terms of environmental education, and particularly for teachers and parents, is on the topic of children's wellbeing. There's also an enormous amount of research that demonstrate that children's wellbeing dramatically increases after they have spent time outdoors. So, and this relates to an increase in personal wellbeing and health over time. Children are learning new things about the natural world. Their experiences in nature also assist with their learning in general. And children develop better relationships with their teachers, or parents, and they also develop stronger bonds with other children when they're learning in nature. Children also can be seen to develop confidence with other capabilities and new experiences by actually being in nature and exploring the natural world. And of course, curiosity is really important for learning and essential for mental health and well-being as well. In the UK, the wildlife trusts over there are calling for every child to spend at least an hour outside in nature every day as part of their school curriculum. And there are also many places in the United States that have started to change the outdoor education curriculum to include nature education and nature journaling practices, which have demonstrated very, very strong correlations with improvements in all of the other areas of learning, particularly in science, engineering, mathematics, and those STEM subjects. Now, the reason why drawing and observing and nature journaling is so good for us is because it's actually developing our eye, hand, and brain coordination. It's critical for everyone, but it's particularly important for children's development. And as an educator myself, as a former teacher, I really am a very, very strong advocate for STEAM, which is the science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics, not just STEM. Without the art, the creativity, the lateral thinking, the problem solving that art brings, we are really limiting children's abilities to learn in the STEM subjects. And we also owe it to our children to offer quiet time and contemplation opportunities. And that's really important in natural settings where children can get down close to the ground, they can look at the trees, they can sit and touch the leaves of plants. These opportunities are valued and supported by our education system, and nature journaling as a practice serves this purpose very, very well. And this is a beautiful little nature journaling of a blue-banded bee by my little granddaughter Lucy, who's 6 years old, and it's just a lovely observation of the structure of a bee and you know, learning a little bit about bees but having fun doing it as well. So just a few suggestions for books that might be useful. The United States has been leading nature journaling practice for many years, led by the amazing John Muir-Laws. Before him, there were a couple of very creative proponents for nature journaling, including Claire Walker-Leslie and Charles Roth, Kathy Johnson as another person. But John Muir-Laws in the United States has really given his lifetime to teaching people about nature journaling and supporting the nature journaling movement in the United States, but now around the world. And there are many, many tutorials and interesting resources available online through John Muir-Laws' nature journaling website. But in Australia recently, there's a new Nature Journaling Australia Facebook page, and this has already grown within just 12 months to around 1.5 thousand members. So it's really clear that people have understood the importance of nature journaling. It's important because we have reached a crisis point in terms of our environment, and the natural resources around our world need to be protected, preserved, and the symbiotic relationships remaining intact. So the more that we can educate our young people and all of our human populations about the importance of nature, the better that it's going to be for the future of this planet. And that's the end of the presentation. If you're interested in a little bit more about NatureArt Lab, we have a website, we have a Instagram and a Facebook page, and more than happy to answer any questions and talk with people about the sort of things that we're doing. We're also creating our own nature journaling resources for teachers and children, and we hope to have those released later this year. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Julia. I think everybody's got, there are a few questions that have come up through the chat. So are you able to answer a few of those for us in the last part of the learning circle?
Yes. Okay. So I'll just, are there any?
I've made a note. One question was the weight of paper, and I know that that's important for artists. There is a particular quality that works really well.
That's right. It's a very good question. If you're wanting to use just graphite and ink, then you can usually use a relatively lightweight paper. It shouldn't have too much of an impact. But I would recommend, if you're wanting to use watercolor and mediums that have a little bit of water in them, then you really do want a slightly heavier weight page. Like, for example, a 300 GSM paper. This is a little nature journal that I have, which has got beautiful textured paper, but it's solid enough to be able to take some water without curling up and becoming difficult to use. If you're using just coloured pencils and ink and graphite pencil, then 180 GSM is fine. It just really depends on your medium. And I actually am a strong believer in that quality of your paper is going to make a big difference for what you want to do.
Yep.
And the sort of long-term results too. Some of the nature journalers that I've been teaching in Canberra have started creating a book. Yeah, something similar to this, which is a Winsor and Newton visual art diary, and they're creating pages of beautiful nature journaling that they're wanting to hand over to their grandchildren one day to show them what they were seeing in nature, again, just nice solid paper with that you can use with some watercolor and that sort of thing. I guess the other question, if you're talking about paper, is the sort of binding that you use. So
yes,
you have a spiral binding, you can have that open and flat on your knee outside in when you're out and walking. But having something that can rest on a firm surface while you're drawing is a really good idea as well.
Okay, thank you. There was another question here. Are there here we go. Are there classes, nature journaling classes for 7-year-olds you would recommend?
Well, what I would recommend is that I think if there isn't a nature journaling community in your state or in your town, is something that you might like to establish. I know there are a couple of communities in each of the states that are starting to organise now to do nature journaling groups, and it is a wonderful, wonderful thing to do, to meet with other people and spend some time in nature doing that. It's the sort of thing that families could do together. I'm also teaching nature journaling for wildlife carers post bushfire, which is a very healing thing for them.
Yes.
And it's been absolutely wonderful working with them. I'm also going to be doing some nature journaling for agricultural producers so that they can start to see the important features of their natural environment and the potential impacts or ways that they can reduce the impact of agriculture on our natural heritage. So, there are so many ways that nature journaling can become a very powerful, life-changing experience in the way that you learn to see the environment and the importance of nature, especially at this time.
Some of the questions are relating to, are there online courses that parents and teachers could link through to? But this sounds to me like it's one of those ideas that you just start
I think
and you
so.
develop.
Yes, it's one of those things that anyone can do at any time, and even if you spent just 10 minutes each day, you would have you would learn so much, and you would start to see the world differently. And so I'm just a really strong believer in just doing it, and make some time. Everyone's busy, but make some time to spend that little bit of quiet time with nature, and start to create your own beautiful records of those experiences that you can have forever to look back on.
But for those who are, lucky enough to be in the ACT, is there opportunities for them to contact you via those outlets that you listed?
Yes, look, I'll be running some. I do run some online nature journaling classes for students, and I'm looking to launch a few new programs that might run over 4 weeks. So I think keep an eye on the website, or join our nature newsletter for updates on things that are coming up. And I'm more than happy to to sort of work with people and to share ideas, resources, and for people to start their own little nature journaling groups wherever you are. Is very, very straightforward thing to do. And if you've got those basic skills and the principles in mind, with observation, drawing, learning to see, and some simple materials, you can really do some wonderful things.
Fabulous. I had one question. It's sometimes you've observed something and you take a photo of it. Do you is that an avenue for some people, that you take a photo of an object and then at a later date you might find the time to sit and enter that into your journal? Is that a possibility?
That's certainly a possibility. I think as long as we understand that there's a very significant difference between sitting in front of something and looking at the subject in the natural setting. That's right. It's very different from doing a drawing from a photograph, because you're not engaging all of those senses as you would if you were in the natural environment. As I think I might have mentioned, that taking a photograph simply does not do the same thing as drawing a subject in terms of developing those neural pathways between your eyes, hands, and brain. So it's the physical doing and experiencing and being in those places that makes it such a valuable thing to do for our mental health and well-being and connection with nature.
Thank you. We've got a lot of chit chat on the chat site here, with people connecting up. So that's a wonderful thing to see. They're all connecting. Are there any other questions though? Because we can run the session a little bit longer. You can either put it in the chat or just raise your hand and I'll try to find you. No? Okay. Right, Viv, would you like to, if there are no other questions, we might end the session off. Viv, do you have?
Yeah, every time I hear you, Julia, talk about nature journaling, I feel so inspired. And I learned something new. So thank you very much from, us all here in the ACT, because we know how wonderful you are. But thank you very much for sharing this nationally, because I really think this is the way our society needs to go. I mean, get those kids off those iPads. Now my husband's going to come in, isn't he? He's bringing me a cup of tea. Anyway, thank you very much, because I think, you know, connecting, I mean, today I was wandering around the Botanic Gardens with a program of kids, and the teacher was saying, oh, these kids, you know, in a classroom, they're totally different, but they were so engaged and asking questions. And it's a matter of getting the kids out there, off their screens, and actually looking at nature, as you said. And as we've discussed before, that's the way you get people that care for nature. And if they care for nature, some of the things that are being done on our planet at the moment won't be happening.
That's right. They are the next generation of carers for this planet, but we all have the responsibility. And by doing nature journaling and giving people that engagement with nature, hopefully we can make a big difference. And I can see it is a global movement now. So, you know, the more people who are engaged with this, the better. And I'm sure it will make a very positive impact on our planet.
I see Katrina Anier has popped onto the screen. Was that because you'd like to ask a question, Kat?
No, it was lovely to hear you, Julia. I'm Kat from Millennium Kids, and I just have been doing nature journaling with kids and at a personal level for hundreds of years, it feels like. But it's just really nice to get the just that, you know, the academic research component to support it. I think that's vital. So I don't have a question. I just loved, you know, to hearing, you know, what you're doing and the connection, because you know, it's vitally important that we connect. I thought it was also interesting, the difference between using the you know, the real life situation other than the photograph. I thought that was really impactful. So thank you for that.
You're most welcome. I'm really, really pleased that we've that, you know, I hope that everyone feels inspired to go out and grab a nature journal and start just looking at what's around you, as simple as from your backyard, you know, through to your favorite walks, and just get outside and be in nature. This is the best thing for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Julia, from our community, the Australian Association for Environmental Education. And for those that aren't aware, this presentation is now going to be made available to everybody for a week. So that's to those that came, and we offer it out to the public in general, and it's all to promote what is seemingly a simple strategy, but it has a profound impact on your thinking and connecting. After that, it's available to our members, and I'm absolutely sure this is going to make an invaluable contribution to us, you know, to teachers to share with the children how and why, and it's like a never-ending story. You know, I don't think there's anything you can't do with the journaling.
Right. Absolutely, that's right, and that's
or include, you know, bits and bobs.
Jen, there was just a question in the
that's
chat
right. It's just
about where the video can be found.
The video will be given, the link will be given to everybody here. And then after that, we'll put a note up on Facebook and on our website in the news section at the front to provide the link. And then it'll be found in the members section. After that, we'll just plonk it in there for you know, to be available.
I just want to thank our national body of the Australian Environmental Educators for allowing us here from the ACT to be able to spread the word around nature journaling, because I really think it is a powerful tool for our teachers.
Oh, well, if anybody else has something that they would like to promote, we're more than happy to hear from them. These are good. Okay, so I think we'll wrap it up now, and thank everybody for attending.
Yeah, thanks.
And happy journaling.
Thank you very much. And actually, if anyone wants to do some journaling, please, I'd love to see what you create. So please feel free to send your nature journal pages to me at info@natureartlab.com.au.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Julia.
Thanks very much, Jennifer.
Okay, enjoy your evening, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. I think you've started something, Julia.
I hope so. I hope so. And that's what this is all about.
Oh, it's wonderful. So thank you again. It was really inspiring. I hadn't imagined that journaling would include so many other elements, you know, the poetry, the reflection. It's a very, you know, I know as a practitioner, a teacher, that you are asked to reflect on your practice. And there's so much science in this. And
yeah, there is. And it's very, very powerful for so many reasons. And that's why it's one of my central tenets of what I do now. So happily STEM gets to be STEAM. Yes, exactly. Into the future. I hope Steaming so. Okay. All right. Well, I might end this unless anybody else wants to chip in. I'll be... Okay. Her daughter is listening and she has so many questions. That's really good. Yeah. Okay. Enjoy your evening, Julia. Thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, there you go. Thank you. Cheers. I'm so glad you were able to join.
I am so grateful. I just, we were homeschooled, we were doing, because we're in lockdown too, and I just only noticed the email halfway through the session, but we got on. So I stopped her schooling online and got her here. Oh, that's really good. Oh, well, good. I hope that you can really take something special out of that and do some really lovely nature journaling from home. It's such a powerful thing to do. I think so. I think, you know, it is, I think it's a must. I think especially now that we're in lockdown, also going out into our yard, the backyard or the front yard and doing this kind of thing would probably, you know, be a good way to kind of move through all of this, I feel. Yes, it certainly is. And especially, you're right, especially at the moment with the COVID outbreak, it's something that everyone can do. So, you know, from the little beetle in your garden to the, you know, the plants that are around you, it's a really, really wonderful practice to do. Thank you so much. Thank you. Is there any way, Julia, of getting the recording? Because as I said, I missed the first 30 minutes. Yes, Cherie. So sorry, that's my dog. I've locked in the other room. The recording, you'll get a link. So anybody that's registered will now be given a link to the full recording. But what Natasha, our admin, does is just tidies up the beginning and end so that it presents well. And so you should get the body of the presentation. Very good. Okay. Thank you so much. We'll be in touch through the website to see if there are any children's classes that come up at some point. Okay. Thank you and bye. 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 Lovely to see you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye. Bye. Okay. I'll sign out now as well, Jennifer. I'm not sure if I press the end button, it might finish it for everybody, but I don't think that's a drama. No. Okay. All good. Okay. Thank you. Thanks again, Julia.